In a crowded venue in Dallas, a delicate minister clad in an immaculate white outfit prepared to captivate the audience with assurances of wonders. What started as a praise gathering grew intensely grave as an unexpected individual strolled along the passageway, Chuck Norris, challenging the figure at the heart of the event. Benny Hinn stood apart from ordinary TV preachers. Over many years, he had established a worldwide network of spiritual restoration, filling large halls with a tone that offered optimism, prosperity, and extraordinary abilities. Famous for causing whole groups to fall with a mere gesture, his image depended on guiding assemblies via dramatic displays. As Chuck Norris posed a sharp inquiry, "Are you devoted to Jesus or to your own interests?" The illusionist of religion had no clue he faced someone skilled not in stagecraft, but in quietness, composure, and genuine lethality. Norris's subdued demeanor dismantled years of theatrics, sparking a breakdown that echoed through each person present. What opened as an evening of devotion evolved into a session of revelation. The hall that resounded with scripted marvels instead observed the stark decline of deception as Benny Hinn buckled beneath a reality too burdensome to bear. Prior to continuing, share your location with us. And if this tale resonates, ensure you're following us since I've got a unique surprise ready for tomorrow. The venue throbbed with intense vitality. 20,000 individuals filled every spot, their shared exhalations clouding the cooled environment, even with heavy-duty systems running at full capacity. Sacred songs blasted from enormous speakers, overwhelming talks and vibrating chests. Damp figures moved together, limbs lifted skyward like coordinated dancers. The atmosphere carried a charged metallic tang of expectation, dense with sense of fragrance, aftershave, and urgent longing. On the platform, intense beams sliced through manufactured mist, forming beams that appeared nearly tangible. Dominating the area with seasoned confidence stood Benny Hinn. This evening, his words echoed via the audio setup, bouncing against solid barriers. This evening, the divine will act. He sported a spotless white ensemble that bounced back the illumination, causing him to glow like a signal. His hair, marked by a gray highlight, was perfectly arranged. Not a hair displaced, despite his dynamic shifts across the platform. The group shouted back. Some cried freely, others shook with eagerness. In the fifth line of seats, Miriam Davis gripped her 8-year-old child Emma's fingers so firmly her joints paled. Half a year of intense therapies had not halted Emma's worsening state. Medical experts had spoken terms like incurable and comfort measures. Yet Miriam rejected their judgment. She'd exhausted 3 payment cards to attend, traveling 14 hours from Missouri while Emma rested in the rear. Every several miles, she'd peeked at her girl through the mirror, murmuring the identical plea. "Hang in there, darling. Just a bit more." "The divine force resides here," Benny declared, his dialect intensifying with feeling. He lifted his arms theatrically, and the assembly replied with booming endorsement. "It's like current in my digits." He shook them to highlight, eliciting another surge of joyful shouts. Miriam bent to Emma's side. "Look, I said he'd assist you. The divine dispatched him for folks like us." From the rear of the venue, Pastor Elias Reynolds observed with trained impartiality. At 72, he'd dedicated 50 years to spiritual work, mainly in modest countryside chapels, nothing resembling this extravaganza. He'd arrived from interest rather than belief, eager to witness directly what attracted such multitudes. His aged fingers rested on the metallic top of his support cane, digits following the smooth timber as his gaze absorbed each element. "Observe how the illumination adjusts with his speech," he said softly to himself, spotting the mechanical accuracy of the setup. Crimson for immediacy, azure for insight, ivory for wonders. It's arranged like a theater production. Near the front, Benny had started the restoration segment of the assembly. His tone softened as he recounted visions. He asserted seeing celestial beings navigating the walkways, holy radiance landing on particular areas. "An individual in Area C arrived this evening with malignancy," he stated, and a wave of breath spread across the group. "The divine is restoring you at this moment. I observe it vanishing." Numerous arms rose in Area C. Miriam's included, signaling frantically, moisture flowing down her cheeks. "Yes, you," Benny directed vaguely into the mass of extended limbs. A woman in her middle years yelled in reply, dropping rearward into the embrace of those following her. Protection personnel in dark attire and communication devices bordered the paths, expressions unmoved. They'd witnessed similar scenes previously, Their gazes perpetually surveyed the assembly, not for heavenly appearances but for possible agitators or overly eager participants who could approach the platform. Additional ones approach. Benny's tone elevated once more. He strode emphatically, his actions rehearsed but appearing impromptu. I sensed the restorative energy intensifying. He swung his limb in a broad curve, and the initial line toppled backward like tiles. Some remained motionless, lids shut in evident spiritual bliss. Others twitched, uttering incomprehensible sounds. Pastor Elias furrowed his brow a bit, his vision detecting what most overlooked. The subtle cue Benny provided to his setup crew right before each surge of force, followed exactly by an alteration in sound volume and beams. The essence is active, Benny exclaimed. He perspired currently, but even that appeared staged sufficiently to express fervor without ruining his ideal look. The assembly's reply became more chaotic. The environment grew heavy with sentiment. Guardians elevated youngsters. Seniors lifted their staffs. All reached toward the platform, toward Benny. Toward aspiration, Miriam rose, raising Emma despite the child's frailty. Please, she shouted, her words swallowed in the noise. Please, my child. Benny advanced to the platform's border. With emotion both authoritative and kind, he chose another beneficiary of holy restoration. Then one more. Each dropped back theatrically. Each turned into further proof of his capability. The routine persisted. The passion escalated. The tunes rose to almost overwhelming volumes. It was an expert lesson in sentimental guidance, heightening pressure, releasing it in managed explosions, then heightening anew. Abruptly, an odd wave traveled through one part of the assembly. Not the typical rush of thrill, but something else. Faces pivoted, murmurs circulated, devices emerged, directed not at Benny, but at a person among the seats on the platform. Benny stumbled briefly. His limb elevated midway through an emphatic motion, paused. His gaze narrowed as he attempted to spot the interruption while preserving his rhythm. The murmur expanded, dispersing like flames in arid foliage until it shaped a clear term relayed from individual to individual. Norris. Protection personnel stood taller, contacting their devices. One communicated hastily into his arm device. Benny regained composure swiftly. "Allow the force to descend," he yelled, slapping his palms with amplified resonance, but his gaze repeatedly shifted to Area F, where the interruption persisted in expanding. At the rear, Pastor Elias sat upright. His seasoned features showed astonishment, then a form of serene contentment. He'd identified the known silhouette now progressing down the path. Line 23. A figure whose existence appeared to generate room around him effortlessly. Chuck Norris hadn't arrived for notice. He donned basic attire, deep denim, a fastened shirt, footwear, no followers, no spectacle. His renowned facial hair was neatly groomed, locks still dense despite their gray. He progressed with the efficiency of action that had earned him fame. No excess, no display. He occupied his place silently, but the expanding impact of his existence kept spreading. On the platform, Benny attempted to reclaim the instance. He initiated another emphatic restoration series. The tunes increased on signal. The beams moved erratically over the assembly. But an alteration had occurred. An unseen balance had joined the space. Benny's gaze repeatedly returned to Area F, even while he announced wonder after wonder. For the initial time that night, a light layer of actual unplanned moisture formed on his forehead. In line 5, Miriam detected the shift. She sensed the assembly's focus dividing, splitting between the figure on the platform and the one in Area F. She lacked knowledge of this Norris, but she perceived the abrupt strain in the space. She held Emma nearer, abruptly fearful the wonder she'd journeyed far to obtain might escape somehow. "What's occurring?" Emma murmured, her tone weak. "Nothing, darling," Miriam reassured her, though doubt had started to emerge. "The divine servant will still aid you." Close to the rear, Pastor Elias bent ahead, placing both palms on his staff. His gaze shifted between Benny's progressively vigorous display and Norris's total immobility. One figure laboring intensely to preserve command, the other applying sway without attempt. "Now this," he said softly, "justifies the trip." The strain extended fine as a thread. Benny's tone increased in volume. The tunes throbbed stronger. The beams flickered with growing strength. But amid it all, Chuck Norris remained utterly motionless, observing, not critiquing, not ridiculing, merely viewing with full focus. His existence by itself sufficed to form a contrast to Benny's staged presentation. The evening had abruptly transformed into an unforeseen occurrence. Two types of influence had entered the venue, and the inevitable clash was established. Benny's pale cloth cut through the atmosphere, removing moisture that had started forming despite the venue's strong cooling. His action stayed exact, staged, but a fresh vigor had joined his act. A compelling aspect absent moments prior. "I detect a multitude of celestial beings joining this location," he stated, tone resounding through audio devices costing more than most participants' residences. The audio captured each variation, each calculated break. "Their feathers are grazing you currently," the assembly replied with fresh zeal, but it lacked the consistent reply from earlier. A mild split had developed. While Numerous still concentrated fully on Benny, groups of interest had moved to Area F where Chuck Norris remained still, his very immobility opposing everything else in the hall. Murmurs spread outward. "Is that truly him? Chuck Norris, what's his purpose here?" Devices appeared all over, pointed not toward the platform but toward the movie star, Benny observed. His trained grin stayed in place, but his gaze toughened mildly. He motioned to his song guide, who grasped instantly. The tunes expanded emphatically, submerging the whispers. The illumination expert reacted as well, directing stronger rays on Benny, dimming the seating zones. An individual present has received news they would never stand again. Benny yelled above the peak. "Rise. The divine is restoring you currently." 3 individuals labored to stand in various zones, aided by emotional partners. The assembly inhaled sharply, then applauded. Recording devices run by Benny's content group enlarged these wonders, displaying them on huge displays bordering the platform. In line 5, Miriam pressed her lip. She looked toward Area F, unable to view Norris distinctly from her position, then returned to the platform she'd organized for months, pleaded for this evening. Yet something seemed wrong now, as if the plan had been modified unexpectedly. "Mother," Emma murmured, her tone faint with fatigue. "Why is the group gazing there rather than at the restorer?" "Quiet, darling." Miriam adjusted Emma's sparse locks. "Simply maintain your focus on the platform. That's where our wonder lies." But her own view betrayed her, constantly pulled toward the disruption. Benny labored more intensely now, his signature motions more sweeping. "The force is rising." His tone adopted an immediate aspect. "I've never detected an energy this potent." He moved his limb, emphatically, and the first 3 lines dropped backward together. The staged overthrow in the essence would typically enthrall all, but flashes persisted from Area F, recording Norris's existence near the rear. Pastor Elias noted the mild conflict developing. "Intriguing," he said softly. "All that sound and action versus complete calm. Which attracts the view more?" Benny felt his hold on the assembly weakening. 2 decades of directing large-scale groups had provided him senses for such instances. He signaled his group, and abruptly individual accounts displayed on the display's prior wonder beneficiaries, recounting their restorations in sentimental specifics. "These are the actual outcomes," Benny announced as the recordings ran. "These are the divine marvels via this service." The approach succeeded partly. Interest started returning to the platform. Miriam bent ahead eagerly, aspiration reigniting. This was her reason for attending, proof that Emma's restoration was feasible. But Benny lacked contentment with a partial success. His gaze repeatedly returned to Area F like a person who found a breach in his vessel. Each look endured only a split second, but they built up, showing his recognition of the risk. 15 minutes into this silent competition, Benny chose a path. Rather than disregarding the diversion, he would integrate it, manage it. "I detect a unique individual has arrived this evening," he stated, tone lowering to a staged near hush that still resonated through each audio device. The tunes quieted on signal. "Someone whose arrival the divine will employ for his honor." The assembly stirred with expectation. Miriam held Emma firmer. Pastor Elias lifted a brow. "Chuck Norris." Benny uttered the name with a warm familiarity, as if they shared a long bond. A figure recognized globally for resilience, for movies that have motivated countless. He elevated his palm toward Area F. "Would you grace us by advancing, sibling Chuck?" The beam moved emphatically, locating Norris with exact accuracy. The assembly burst into shouts and claps. Benny grinned generously, clapping too, regaining command by recognizing what he couldn't overlook. For numerous extended moments, Norris remained still, The claps persisted but started to wane with doubt. Benny's grin stayed fixed, but a tendon pulsed in his cheek. Then, with the identical efficiency of motion that defined his movies, Norris rose. He didn't signal the assembly. He didn't perform for the recorders. He merely accepted the request with a mild incline and started progressing toward the path. Yes, honor the divine. Benny's tone resounded with fresh assurance. Let's greet this figure of belief, this national symbol. The assembly replied eagerly, though numerous appeared unclear about the events. Was this organized? Was Norris included in the presentation? The doubt generated its own vitality. Protection personnel advanced toward Norris, then paused, trapped between procedures. Their devices hummed with immediate directives. Ultimately, two bordered him, not restricting but accompanying as he progressed down the path toward the platform. Benny kept describing the instance, presenting it as heavenly arranged. The divine unites individuals for his aims. Tonight, sibling Chuck has been pulled here by the essence, but those nearest the path observed something Benny couldn't perceive from the platform. Norris's features hadn't altered. No grin, no thrill, just serene, concentrated focus. Absorbing all around him as he advanced, Miriam extended into the path as he went by her line. Please, she murmured, extending toward him. My child, Norris halted. Unlike Benny, who had chosen individuals from the assembly all evening without genuinely noticing them, Norris gazed straight at Miriam and Emma. His gaze gentled. He laid a palm softly on Emma's crown for a short instant, inclined to Miriam, then proceeded. The basic exchange endured less than 5 moments, but moisture emerged in Miriam's eyes. Something in that short contact had seemed more sincere than anything experienced all evening. From the rear, Pastor Elias observed closely. Now we'll witness, he said softly, display versus essence. On the platform, Benny extended his limbs wide, inviting Norris toward the stairs. His grin stayed brilliant, but those in the initial lines could detect strategy behind his gaze. He was adapting, modifying his meticulously organized agenda to include this unforeseen factor. Approach sibling Chuck, partake in this energy with us. Norris arrived at the stairs. For an instant he halted, gazing up at the ornate platform with its massive displays, mist devices, and expert illumination setup. His gaze met Benny's. Something unspoken exchanged between them. A silent acknowledgement that surpassed the sound, the assembly, the extravaganza. Benny's grin wavered for a mere second. Norris ascended the stairs. The tunes rose emphatically. The assembly held its shared inhalation. 2 influences had met on the identical platform, and all present understood without fully grasping how or why that all was on the verge of transformation. The platform beams glared, creating sharp outlines across Benny's features as he stretched his palm toward Chuck Norris. Nearby, the difference between the 2 figures grew pronounced. Benny in his flawless white attire, every strand ideally positioned. Norris in basic garments, nothing meant to attract notice. Benny's features lively, staged. Norris serene, balanced. 2 forms of existence, one created, one innate. Chuck Norris. Everyone! Benny's tone echoed through the audio setup. He grasped Norris's palm with both his own, recorders capturing the instance for the large displays. A genuine national champion, the assembly shouted. Devices flashed like storms throughout the venue. Protection personnel moved anxiously at the platform borders, unsure how to manage this unscheduled occurrence. Benny proceeded, never releasing command of the speaking device. I've consistently respected your position for belief, sibling Chuck. Your courage in the film industry. He pivoted to the group with trained precision. Isn't it marvelous when the divine assembles his followers? Additional claps. Benny enjoyed it shortly, then pivoted back to Norris. What draws you to our gathering this evening? Heavenly arrangement. I'm certain narrating and readying this tale required considerable effort. So if you're appreciating it, follow our page. It signifies much to us. Now return to the tale. He presented the speaking device with a flourish but maintained his grip solidly on it, prepared to retrieve it immediately. Norris made no action to accept it. Instead, he spoke in a tone that somehow resonated without enhancement. Decades of combat training had instructed him to emit from his center. I arrived to watch, he stated plainly. Benny's grin wavered briefly. To watch the divine force, amen. He pulled the speaking device back mildly, and you've definitely observed it this evening. Wonders occurring right before us. Down in the 5th line, Miriam experienced an odd inner conflict. She'd arrived fully trusting in Benny's heavenly link, urgent for her child's restoration. Yet something regarding Norris's subdued respect connected with her. She discovered herself bending ahead, straining to grasp each term of this unforeseen dialogue. "Why do you perform this?" Norris inquired, his tone still resonating with that effortless emission. No blame in his manner, just true interest. Benny chuckled, though it failed to reach his gaze. "Why, to deliver the divine restoration to the multitudes to show his capability." He pivoted to the group again. "Isn't that accurate, gathering?" Confirmation resounded back from countless voices, but it lacked unity. Areas of quiet had started to develop as individuals observed, unclear. Pastor Elias bent ahead on his staff. "There it is," he said softly. "The inquiry beneath the inquiry." Norris stayed unaffected by both Benny's evasion and the group's reply. He remained utterly motionless, the identical managed existence that had made him legendary in combat arts and cinema. "But why the display?" he explained. The beams, the tunes, the emphatics, an abrupt strain sparked across the platform. Benny's content group enlarged on his features where his grin had grown mildly rigid. The praise group struck a mild note sequence, generating a sentimental base that Benny could develop upon. The setup aids individuals in accepting. Benny regained composure fluidly. Belief requires setting. Ruler David moved before the divine with full strength. He shifted across the platform with fresh vigor, performing for the recorders. We generate a setting where individuals can encounter the divine existence. Some in the assembly applauded again, but others had become silent, viewing the exchange with growing concentration. The venue, so combined in zeal minutes prior, had started to separate like liquid around rocks. Norris inclined mildly, absorbing the reply. Then in the identical serene tone, "Are you devoted to Jesus or to your own interests?" The inquiry lingered in the atmosphere. The praise group stumbled, uncertain how to accompany this unforeseen instance. The illumination expert stopped. Tinted rays hung in manufactured mist. Benny's features transitioned through various feelings too rapidly to follow. Astonishment, fury, strategy, regain. "Sibling," he stated, tone dropping to a trained manner of soft adjustment. "All we perform here honors the divine," he motioned broadly. "These individuals' existences are transforming, but the harm was inflicted." The basic inquiry had sliced through levels of setup, exposing the core nature of the occurrences, not via blame or assault, but via the serene capability of sincere questioning. In the fifth line, Miriam sensed something fracture within her, the complete trust she'd placed in Benny Hinn and his work. She gazed at Emma, delicate in her embrace, and for the initial time questioned if they should have arrived. Norris didn't urge more. He lacked necessity. Instead, he performed something unforeseen. He stretched his palm to Benny. In a motion of harmony, Benny paused, then accepted it, conscious of countless gazes and numerous recorders. "We're all divine attendants," he declared to the assembly, attempting to retrieve story command, each with varied abilities and summons, but his tone had forfeited something vital. The complete authority, the unchallenged assurance, both had been mildly weakened by 7 basic terms. "Are you devoted to Jesus or to your own interests?" Pastor Elias inclined slowly from the rear, like observing a high-force system encounter a peak. He noted to himself, "All that vitality must direct somewhere." Benny motioned to his group. Immediately the tunes rose. The beams started their arranged movement again. "Let's appreciate Sibling Chuck for arriving," he stated, directing Norris solidly toward the platform stairs. "And now let's proceed with what the divine holds for us this evening." The assembly replied, but the combined zeal had scattered. Some applauded with fresh eagerness, reinforcing their commitment to the night. Others observed quietly, handling the exchange they'd just seen. A few started softly collecting their items. As Norris descended the stairs with the identical balanced serenity that had defined his arrival, protection personnel formed ranks behind him, guaranteeing he shifted away from the platform. Not harshly, no one desired to handle Chuck Norris roughly, but decisively. Benny started a new surge of statements and forecasts, his tone more vigorous than prior, as if loudness and strength could reclaim what had vanished. "I observe restoration descending like precipitation," he announced. "I observe wonders increasing." Some replied as they had prior, elevating palms, shouting out, moving with the tunes. But something had altered in the setting. An inquiry had been embedded that couldn't be removed by display. Norris resumed his place in Area F without spectacle. He didn't grin or display contentment. He merely continued observing, absorbing all with the identical concentrated focus. Miriam discovered her view pulled to him instead of the platform. "Mother," Emma murmured. "What occurred? Why does the restorer sound altered now?" Miriam adjusted her child's locks. "I'm unclear, darling," she confessed. I think someone just posed a significant inquiry from the rear." Pastor Elias observed the mild disorder developing throughout the venue. The separating responses, the murmured discussions, the doubtful looks. He'd observed this design before in smaller environments. The instant when extravaganza faces genuineness and forfeits something essential in the interaction. On the platform, Benny labored harder than all evening, extracting every method, every expression, every motion that had dependably influenced groups for years. The setup standards stayed perfect. The tune struck every sentimental signal. The beams depicted emphatic scenes across the platform. But something had transformed. A basic inquiry lingered in the atmosphere like unseen vapor. Are you devoted to Jesus or to your own interests? And no degree of arrangement could cause it to vanish. The following 40 minutes grew progressively urgent. Benny paced across the platform with fresh strength. His actions keener, his statements more assertive. Moisture now marked his features openly. No longer the managed attractive shine of prior. An individual here has received a diagnosis of incurable malignancy. His tone peaked. The divine is eliminating it from your form currently. I can view it breaking down under his capability. The praise group replied to his signals flawlessly, elevating the tunes to resounding peaks. The illumination expert performed perfect shifts. Golden warmth for restoration instances, chilled azure for forecast, harsh ivory for heavenly arrivals. Every setup component stayed impeccable, but the fractures had started to appear not in the arrangement but in the link between actor and viewers. In line 5, Miriam rose, elevating Emma as high as her limbs permitted. "Here," she shouted, tone fracturing. "My child, please, she requires restoration." Benny's gaze passed over her, concentrating instead on simpler instances. He directed to a senior gentleman with a staff. "Your joint pain is departing your form." The gentleman released his staff and advanced several cautious steps while the assembly inhaled. Recorders captured his emotional features for the large displays. Benny's content group understood precisely how to present these instances for greatest effect. One of the setup helpers murmured to the recorder guide through her device. "Person in azure sweater at point B. 12 prepared and set." The guide inclined, changing to recorder 4 to record the wonder from the most complimentary position. The senior gentleman's tentative advances seemed victorious on the enormous displays. His features altered by aspiration and ease. What the recorders avoided showing, what they cautiously bypassed, was the identical gentleman an hour prior advancing with little trouble to his place, using the staff mainly for stability rather than aid. They also wouldn't display him tomorrow, when the sentimental peak diminished and his joint pain stayed unaltered. Yet, even as this wonder developed, dozens of viewers were examining their devices, distributing recordings of the challenge with Norris viewing responses, circulating across online platforms in immediate time. The occasion was no longer limited within the venue's barriers. Number Ben's Chuck rising nationally. Did anyone else observe Norris silence Hinn with a single inquiry? Attended revival assemblies for 20 years. Never witnessed anything similar to this evening. A lady 3 lines behind Miriam bent toward her partner. My siblings viewing the direct broadcast says it stopped right after Norris ascended the platform. They're stating equipment issues. Her partner raised a brow. Convenient schedule. These murmured discussions multiplied throughout the venue, generating an underlying flow that rivaled the meticulously organized extravaganza on the platform. Pastor Elias noted small groups of individuals quietly departing up the paths. Not numerous, perhaps 2 or 3% of the assembly, but sufficient to signal a change. He'd witnessed this prior in his years of service. The instant when the deception became apparent as deception, like viewing an illusion performance after someone's clarified the method, he said to himself. A youthful pair nearby heard him. The spouse bent closer. Attended these revivals for years, he shared. Never doubted it prior, but seeing Norris merely stand there not participating makes you question what we've been supporting all this period. His spouse inclined, glancing toward the platform where Benny persisted in his progressively chaotic act. It's like viewing behind the barrier in Oz. On the platform, Benny detected it too. His gaze shifted more often to Area F, where Norris stayed placed, still observing with that identical steadfast focus, then to the departures where the slow exit continued. then to his setup group, silently requiring more sound, more beams, more vitality. Through his internal device, Benny heard his setup director's tone. We're forfeiting drive. Need to change. Go to backup plan. Benny inclined almost unnoticed. He'd established his network on recognizing when to alter methods, when to intensify, when to generate a fresh sentimental high. The capability is rising, Benny stated, tone straining mildly. If you trust Rise currently, rise for your wonder. Most of the assembly stood obediently. Miriam labored to her feet, still supporting Emma, but dispersed throughout the hall, individuals stayed seated, some near Norris, others who had been observing him, taking in something of his serene certainty. A middle-aged lady in Area D stayed firmly placed, limbs folded. When her companion pulled at her arm, urging her to rise, she shook her head. I'm finished acting, she stated quietly. If the divine wants to restore me, he can achieve it while I'm placed. For the initial time that evening, the reply to Benny's summons was visibly unfinished. His features flashed with something near alarm before regaining. Those rising, place palms on those placed. The divine will employ you as his tools of restoration. It was a smart regain, making the placed individuals the center of service rather than instances of opposition. But the harm was inflicted. The unified group had developed break lines. In the setup area above the platform, Benny's group rushed to modify. The guide murmured urgent directives to recorder operators. Remain close on the affirmative replies. Bypass broad views of the departures. Locate sentimental features. We've forfeited recorders 12 and 14. A specialist reported. The operators are messaging that they're receiving opposing directives. The guide cursed softly. What do you signify opposing directives? They're stating someone instructed them to obtain response views from Area F to concentrate on Norris. Who authorized that? The guide's features reddened with fury. Secure all exchanges. No one records anything without my immediate approval. But the interruption persisted in circulating. 2 additional recorder operators reported comparable confusion regarding their directives. Someone in the beam area had started mildly altering the meticulously programmed orders, generating abrupt shifts that further weakened the setting. The mechanism of extravaganza, so accurately adjusted, so skillfully preserved for years, was encountering its initial major failure. Miriam felt a touch on her arm. A middle-aged lady stood behind her, gaze compassionate but doubtful. May I plead for your child? She inquired. Miriam inclined gratefully, though her view kept drifting towards Area F, where Norris sat. Something about his serene existence amid the growing disorder felt like a stabilizer. The lady placed soft palms on Emma's arms and started to plead, not with the acting style Benny had demonstrated, but with basic, sincere terms. Divine, if you're actual, she murmured. Aid this youngster. The plainness of the plea impacted Miriam strongly. No staged statements, no assurances of instant, marvelous recovery. Just sincere doubt paired with true empathy. That's the initial genuine plea I've heard all evening, she understood. Around the venue, comparable instances of sincerity started piercing the created setting. Small clusters formed naturally as the organized extravaganza on the platform became progressively disconnected from the personal truth in the places. And Senior Lady in Area C started quietly sharing her own account of ailment and slow recovery with those nearby. Not as a wonder account, but as an intricate path of health care, group aid, and inner development. It wasn't immediate. She informed them it wasn't emphatic, but it was actual. In Area H, a physician who had unwillingly joined his spouse found himself encircled by individuals, asking health inquiries about conditions Benny had asserted to be restoring. Instead of rejecting belief completely, he provided reflective thoughts on the connection between health and inner life. Both hold their position, he clarified. The issue arises when we anticipate one to perform the role of the other. These groups of true personal link, unscripted, unorganized, unprocessed through staged setup, contrasted sharply with Benny's progressively automatic act. On the platform, Benny had initiated a fresh approach. I sense guided to speak foreseeingly to someone unique this evening, he stated. The tunes shifted to a tense bass, someone whose existence has affected countless. His view fixed intentionally on Area F. The recorders moved toward Chuck Norris. The assembly murmured with expectation. Sibling Chuck, Benny summoned. The divine has provided me a message for you. It was a strategic action, an effort to reclaim command by integrating the interrupting element into his story. If Norris wouldn't participate when summoned on the platform, perhaps he could be incorporated into the presentation from afar. Norris didn't respond. He didn't rise, didn't recognize being highlighted. He merely persisted, observing, features neutral. A university learner recording the occasion on his device nudged his companion. Standard authority action, he murmured, attempting to re-establish superiority by forcing Norris into his story. His companion inclined, like when a leader attempts to adopt a detractor by asserting they're actually aligned. The analytical separation with which they viewed the exchange revealed another fracture in the dark exterior. Benny's methods, once unseen to the viewers, absorbed in sentimental zeal, had become apparent as methods. Benny continued regardless. I view your effect for the realm. I view how the divine has utilized your stage. His tone adopted the rhythmic flow he used for forecasts. But the divine states there is additional, a fresh period, new opportunities. The vague affirmative predictions persisted, the type that could relate to anyone, but sounded individually significant. The method had succeeded numerous times prior, but something remarkable occurred. The assembly's focus started to change. Instead of viewing Benny deliver his forecast, individuals turned in their places to view Norris's response to it. The center of gravity of the venue had shifted. Benny detected it instantly. His terms stumbled for a split second before he regained, tone growing louder, more persistent. I view benefit approaching your path. I view growth. A youthful lady in the 10th line bent toward her partner. Is it merely me? Or does it sound like he's attempting to influence Chuck Norris? The partner suppressed a chuckle, providing him benefit like it's something he manages. Pretty certain Chuck Norris doesn't require Benny Hinn's endorsement. Their lightheartedness would have been unimaginable an hour prior when the assembly moved as one under Benny's guidance. But the enchantment had shattered, permitting critical reflection to penetrate the sentimental guidance. Still, Norris made no reply. Not dismissal, not acceptance, simply serene observation. In line 5, Miriam observed this odd deadlock with increasing clarity. She'd spent months tracking Benny digitally, trusting his every term, seeing him as a direct channel to heavenly capability. Now viewing him strain against Norris's serene existence, something basic shifted in her comprehension. It's not succeeding, she murmured almost to herself. The lady still pleading for Emma looked up. What's not succeeding? Any of it? Miriam answered, the understanding circulating through her like chilled liquid. It's all act. The lady inclined slowly. I've attended these occasions for 20 years, she admitted. Always sensed something was absent, but couldn't identify it until this evening. What altered? Miriam inquired. The lady glanced towards Area F. Him. He's not participating in the activity, not acting, just existing, and somehow that's stronger than all this. She motioned toward the platform where Benny persisted in his progressively ineffective forecast. A protection guard nearby shifted uncomfortably, touching his device. Through it, he heard increasingly chaotic directives from his overseer. We require extra staff at departures. CF and H group movement is unusual. Preserve visible existence but do not limit motion. The protection group had prepared for health crises, for aggressive interruptions, for platform rushers, but not for this gradual natural dissolution of the occasion's sentimental unity, not for viewers slowly awakening from a shared state. On the platform, Benny abandoned the forecast approach and changed again. Let's have an instance of potent honor, he summoned to the praise group. Let all that breathes honor the divine. The ensemble launched into their most energetic song, percussion beating, strings crying. The assembly replied mechanically. Years of religious training taking control. Palms elevated, forms shifted. The known rhythm temporarily restored a sense of togetherness. But the fractures couldn't be repaired now. They had circulated too far, reached too deep. Pastor Elias observed from the rear as the evening transformed into something no one had expected. Least of all Benny Hinn, the ruler's fresh attire, he murmured. All it requires is one individual willing to view clearly. An attendant nearby caught the reference and inclined. Whole location feels altered now, she stated, like we all awakened simultaneously. Pastor Elias grinned mildly. Not simultaneously, individual by individual. Reality operates that way. Not like a thunderstrike, but like morning emerging. Different for each set of views. The attendant reflected on this, then motioned toward the departures where the movement of exits had increased. Worked these occasions for 6 years. Never observed individuals depart before the major summons and contribution. The contribution, Pastor Elias pondered. I question if that's what he's most concerned about forfeiting. This evening, near the front, one of Benny's helper servants discussed urgently with the platform overseer. We need to advance the contribution summons, he insisted. We're losing too many individuals. The platform overseer shook his head. Can't disrupt the honor collection. It's the only element maintaining any drive currently. Then right after, no additional restoration parts, no additional forecasts. Get the containers out and gather what we can. Protection guards discussed urgently through their devices, viewing the departures where the slow exit had grown heavier. Nothing that would be apparent on recorder yet, but a worrying pattern for an occasion that usually held viewers captive until the emphatic end. In the setup area, Benny's content guide made a choice. Stop the direct broadcast. He directed equipment issues. We'll modify this part before releasing the official recording. Already executed, his helper reported. Online is exploding about it, though. Lots of viewers recording circulating. Get our reply group on it. Standard communication modified for duration and clarity. Complete version arriving soon. Rights claim. Any recording showing the Norris exchange, but they both understood it was too delayed. The meticulously managed story had already split beyond repair. On the platform, Benny battled to regain drive. He'd managed groups of thousands for years. He'd established a network on his capability to generate and maintain sentimental zeal. This was merely another obstacle to surmount. I want all to shut their views currently, he ordered. Shut your views and elevate both palms to the sky. Most followed instantly. Others paused, then complied. But scattered throughout the venue, individuals kept their views open, observing, assessing, seeing the mechanism behind the wonder for the initial time. In Area F, Chuck Norris hadn't shifted. He stayed exactly as he had been throughout the night. Attentive, present, unaffected by the sentimental guidance swirling around him, Miriam didn't shut her views. Neither did Emma. Together they observed as Benny started to pace the platform with increasing restlessness, his motions growing more vigorous, his tone adopting an urgent edge absent prior. Do you detect it? He required. Do you detect the energy? Some shouted back confirmations, others stayed silent. A youth seated behind Miriam bent a head. Is it merely me? He murmured. Or does he sound like he's attempting to persuade himself as much as us? Miriam inclined slowly. I think he is. In Area F, Chuck Norris persisted in his serene observation, neither joining nor interrupting, simply bearing witness with complete focus. And somehow that sufficed to dismantle everything. 10 minutes later, urgency had fully replaced assurance in Benny's act. His tone had adopted a rough quality. His actions become progressively irregular. The meticulously arranged flow of the night had deteriorated into a chaotic attempt to reclaim what had vanished. The issue is lack of belief, he stated, pointing his digit toward the assembly. Moisture poured freely down his features now, marking the neck of his white attire. The divine cannot act where trust is absent. It was a strategic mistake, accusing the viewers for the night's declining vitality. Some moved uncomfortably in their places. Others exchanged concerned looks. The praise ensemble tried to compensate with rising tunes, but the separation between platform and seats had grown too broad. In the initial line, a longtime backer of the work, a lady who had contributed thousands over the years, recoiled visibly at the charge. She'd arrived this evening with her spouse, trusting as always that Benny was the divine's chosen tool. Now she found herself questioning if she'd been honoring the messenger rather than the message. He's never addressed us like this prior, she murmured to her spouse. It's like he's furious at us. Her spouse inclined grimly. He's always had someone to accuse when things don't proceed his way, usually forces or the adversary. Never seen him direct at the assembly, though. 5 lines behind them, a cluster of university learners who had arrived partly from interest and partly seeking true inner experience, exchanged aware looks. One bent over to murmur to the others. Standard group leader conduct, he said softly. When truth doesn't match his assertions, accuse the followers for lacking adequate trust or dedication. His companion, a mind study major, inclined. Standard mental conflict. His perspective is being challenged, so he's reinforcing instead of modifying his beliefs. Through his internal device, Benny heard his setup director's progressively urgent tone. We need to conclude this. We're forfeiting the space. Skip to the end part. Get to the summons. But Benny couldn't halt now. Something had fractured inside him, A lifetime of careful management yielding to raw feeling. The challenge to his authority, to the network he'd established, had become personal. I've been in the divine's existence when peaks shifted. Benny's tone broke mildly. I've observed the immobile advance, the sightless view. Why are you restraining your trust this evening? In line 5, Miriam cradled Emma closer. The lady who had pleaded for them had returned to her place, leaving Miriam with a soft press of the arm and murmured terms. The divine notices you, with or without the extravaganza. Those terms echoed in Miriam's thoughts as she observed Benny's progressively urgent act. She'd risked her aspiration on this figure's link to the heavenly. Now she questioned if she'd been seeking the divine in all the incorrect locations. Mother, Emma murmured, her small palm touching Miriam's moisture-marked features. I don't think the loud figure can aid us. Miriam swallowed difficultly. I think you're accurate, darling. But I'm not fearful anymore, Emma proceeded, her gaze surprisingly clear. The serene figure made me feel secure even though he didn't assure anything. Miriam held her child firmer, realizing that in her urgent search for a wonder she'd overlooked something vital, the tranquility that came not from grand assurances but from genuine existence. From the rear, Pastor Elias noted the deterioration with the trained view of someone who had seen many services rise and decline. Arrogance precedes ruin, he said softly, and a proud essence before a drop. A younger servant seated nearby heard him. You've witnessed this, Prior? He inquired, his own features troubled as he observed Benny's dismantling. Pastor Elias inclined slowly. Different magnitude, same design. When service becomes about the servant rather than the message, this is always the final outcome. Just usually occurs in private, not before thousands. On the setup platform, high above the venue floor, Benny's leadership group huddled in crisis discussion. The content guide motioned frantically toward the departures where the flow of departing participants had grown from a slow to a steady movement. We're losing individuals rapidly, he whispered. The gathering containers are returning half vacant. This will cost us greatly. The economic guide inclined grimly, entering calculations into his device. The direct broadcast product sales have already dropped 70% since we stopped the feed. Online interaction is turning adverse. We need to remove him from that platform before he inflicts more harm. How? The content guide required. You want to descend there and inform him it's finished? Proceed. They both understood the proposal was impossible. No one disrupted Benny Hinn during an assembly. No one managed him once he was on the platform. That had been the unspoken guideline for years. A guideline that had assisted establish his network and would now contribute to its potential breakdown. On the platform, Benny directed his focus directly to the source of his dismantling. Some arrived to mock. His tone rose accusingly as he motioned toward Area F. Some arrived not to honor but to evaluate. The recorders moved to Chuck Norris, who remained exactly as he had been, serene, attentive, neither antagonistic nor backing. His features hadn't altered since he'd posed that basic inquiry. But the divine is the evaluator, Benny proceeded, tone rising further. Not human, not stars, the divine alone. It was the initial direct assault, and the assembly replied with uncomfortable quiet. Benny had violated his own primary rule of act. Never display frustration, never forfeit control of your feelings. A middle-aged pair in Area C, longtime followers who had journeyed from Oklahoma for this occasion, exchanged troubled looks. He seems altered, the spouse murmured. I've never witnessed him like this. Her spouse inclined slowly. It's like observing someone forfeit their hold on something they've always managed. Nearby, a young guardian with 3 youngsters gathered her family's items. We're departing, she informed her confused kids. This isn't what I brought you to observe. In the management area, the technical guide stared at his displays in growing alarm. Recorder operators were beginning to make unauthorized choices about what to record. 2 were fixed permanently on Norris despite direct orders to concentrate elsewhere. Another had started capturing the departure of participants' footage that would never be utilized in any official setup, but would tell the true account of the evening. It's like they're intentionally undermining us, he muttered, then stopped as a more disturbing idea occurred to him. Or maybe they're finally recording what's actual, instead of what we instruct them to display. On the platform, Benny's assault intensified. Let those with hearing perceive what the essence is stating. His tone climbed higher, straining against its natural scope. Let the ridiculers be confused. The recorders remained fixed on Norris, whose features hadn't changed. He didn't appear offended or even concerned by becoming the target of Benny's growing fury. He simply continued observing, still and centered amid the escalating disorder. Throughout the venue, the silent witness's serene response to verbal assault created a stark contrast that even the most devoted followers couldn't ignore. Benny's reactions appeared increasingly unstable when contrasted with Norris's composure. "He's not even responding," a teenage girl whispered to her mother. "And somehow that's making the preacher appear worse." The mother nodded slowly. A lifetime of religious training battling with what she was witnessing, sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Benny stormed to the edge of the stage, pointing directly at Section F. "You think you can arrive here and interrupt the divine's work?" His dialect thickened with feeling. "You think your earthly fame signifies anything in the divine's dwelling?" The protection team shifted nervously, touching their devices. This was uncharted territory. Benny attacking a celebrity guest. The careful narrative spiraling completely out of control. The head of protection, a former law officer who had worked for the service for 15 years, felt moisture on his forehead. His team had protocols for almost every imaginable interruption. Health crises, objectors, unauthorized platform access, but nothing for this situation where the threat to order came from the figure they were tasked with safeguarding. "Sir," he whispered urgently into his microphone, knowing Benny could hear through his device. "We should consider ending the assembly. The situation is becoming unstable." But Benny either didn't hear or chose to ignore the warning. His focus had narrowed to a precise point, fixed entirely on the figure whose serene existence had somehow undermined everything. From the setup area came frantic directives. "Cut his device. Signal the reserve tune track. Remove recorder 3 from Norris." But it was too delayed. The break had become a gap. Throughout the hall, individuals began rising not in honor but in preparation to depart. What had begun as a slow became a steady flow toward the departures. Guardians gathered youngsters. The seniors leaned on partners. Even devoted followers who had traveled hundreds of miles sensed that something basic had broken. "Should we remain?" a young lady asked her partner as they observed the developing scene. He shook his head, already gathering their outerwear. "This isn't about the divine anymore. It's about a figure's self being challenged. I don't need to observe the rest to know how it concludes." Miriam remained placed, holding Emma close. "Should we depart?" Emma murmured. "I don't know, darling." Miriam observed the developing scene with a mixture of disappointment and emerging clarity. "I don't think the restoration we came for is going to occur. Not like this." Emma inclined, wisdom beyond her age in her weary gaze. "I think the actual wonder this evening isn't what we anticipated it would be." "What do you signify?" "Individuals are viewing the reality," Emma stated simply. "Isn't that a type of restoration too?" Miriam stared at her child in amazement, realizing that perhaps the greatest wonder wasn't physical at all, but the removal of blindness that had nothing to do with physical vision. On the platform, Benny saw the departure beginning. Panic flashed across his features. Everything was slipping away. The meticulously maintained illusion of absolute inner authority. The sentimental peak that would lead to the night's massive contribution collection. The accounts that would fuel next month's resource gathering. "Wait," he shouted, tone raw with urgency. "The essence is still active. Don't depart now when progress is approaching." But the flow had turned. Even those who remained placed observed with changed views, the enchantment broken, the mechanics of guidance visible for the initial time. A longtime staff individual standing in the sides observed with growing concern. She'd worked for the service for over a decade, trusting wholeheartedly in its mission. Now observing Benny's composure disintegrate, she felt her own trust wavering not in the divine, but in the figure she trusted to represent him. "It's all coming apart," she murmured to another staff individual. Her colleague inclined grimly. "Question is, how many individuals will he pull down with him in Area F?" Chuck Norris finally shifted with the identical serene dignity that had characterized his arrival. He rose, not emphatically, not calling attention to himself, simply rising to depart. His purpose apparently completed. The motion drew Benny's view immediately. Something inside him snapped the final thread of professional management, yielding to bare fear and rage. "You," he shouted, pointing his digit toward Norris. "You caused this. You brought an essence of doubt into this location." Droplets flew from his lips as his tone rose to a scream. "Who do you think you are?" The inquiry echoed through the audio setup, reverberating off solid walls. The tunes faltered into quiet. The beams froze in position. 20,000 individuals held their breath. In that moment of terrible quiet, the contrast between the two figures became starkly clear to everyone observing. One figure unraveling under pressure, unable to maintain his meticulously constructed persona when challenged. The other standing in serene confidence, needing no act, no enhancement, no special illumination to command attention. Even Benny's most devoted followers could view the difference now. A lady who had attended his revivals for 20 years found moisture streaming down her features, not from inner bliss, but from the painful recognition of how much of her trust had been invested in theatrics rather than reality. All these years, she murmured to her sibling. How did we not view it? Her sibling squeezed her palm. Maybe we weren't ready to view until now. Norris paused in the path. For the initial time, he addressed Benny directly, his tone carrying without effort or enhancement, just a figure who posed an inquiry. The plainness of the reply seemed to strike Benny physically. He staggered backward as if pushed, his features contorting. One palm clutched at his costly silk neckwear, loosening it with frantic motions, the other pressed against his chest. In the management area, the setup team froze, staring at their displays in horror. The content guide grabbed his speaking device. Get health on standby. Now the head of protection was already moving, signaling to his team with sharp, urgent motions. Two health experts stationed backstage grabbed their crisis kit and rushed toward the stairs. You can't, Benny gasped, tone suddenly thin. You don't comprehend what his legs buckled beneath him. Benny Hinn, the figure who had commanded platforms across the world for years, collapsed in a pile of white fabric at the center of his own extravaganza. For one frozen instant, no one shifted. The collapse seemed like it might be part of the act. Another staged flourish from a figure known for emphatics. A veteran recorder individual who had filmed hundreds of Benny's assemblies found himself hesitating, uncertain whether to keep recording. He'd captured countless staged overthrows in the essence over the years, carefully framing each one for maximum impact. But this was different. The color had drained from Benny's features. His form hadn't fallen in the practiced way of a performative collapse, but had crumpled awkwardly. One leg bent beneath him. Is this actual? The recorder individual asked his colleague. The other figure inclined grimly. Too actual. Then reality pierced the deception. Benny lay motionless, features pale. Health team. The platform director's tone cut through the shock. All pretense abandoned. We require the health team now. Disorder erupted. Staff rushed from sides. Protection guards converged on the platform. The praise leader grabbed a speaking device. Please remain serene. Please stay in your places. But the assembly was already in motion, some pushing toward departures, others pressing forward for a better view of the fallen minister. Devices recorded every instant. Online platforms exploded with conflicting reports. In line 5, Miriam rose, holding Emma protectively. We should depart, she decided, no longer torn. Whatever she had hoped to find here was gone. As they edged toward the path, Emma looked back at the platform where health personnel now surrounded Benny's crumpled form. What occurred to him, Mother? Miriam considered how to explain something she barely comprehended herself. I think the reality was too burdensome for him to bear from his position near the rear. Pastor Elias observed the scene develop with somber recognition. He'd seen smaller versions of this collapse before, ministers whose meticulously constructed personas shattered when confronted with genuineness. But never on this scale, never so publicly, never so completely. The higher the base, he murmured, the harder the drop. The young servant who had spoken to him earlier shook his head in disbelief. Will he recover from this? Pastor Elias considered the inquiry carefully. Physically, probably, but what died this evening can't be revived with health intervention. What died? Deception, the old pastor replied. And once individuals have viewed through it, you can never rebuild it the same way. In the midst of the confusion, Chuck Norris continued making his serene exit. He didn't rush, didn't conceal his features from the devices recording him. He moved with the same centered serenity that had characterized his entire existence, affecting everything around him without effort. Those he passed in the paths felt something inexplicable, a quality that couldn't be manufactured or performed. Some reached out to touch him, not as star admirers, but as individuals seeking connection with something genuine amid the disorder of collapsed deceptions. Norris acknowledged each individual with serene dignity, but didn't stop until he reached the departure where Miriam and Emma waited to leave. There he paused without spectacle or display. He knelt to Emma's view level. The actual restoration, he stated gently, doesn't come from platforms or beams. Emma looked at him with solemn gaze. Where does it come from? Norris grinned mildly, the first change in his features all evening. From reality, from affection without act, from trust that doesn't require claps. Miriam felt moisture streaming down her features. Not the guided feeling she'd experienced during Benny's act, but something deeper and more sincere. Thank you, she murmured, for helping me view. Norris inclined once, then rose and continued on his way, disappearing into the night outside the venue. Behind them, emergency experts had reached the platform. The outlook wasn't life-endangering. An anxiety episode, extreme strain, physical breakdown from emotional overload. Benny would recover physically, but something else had died this evening. A deception had been shattered, not by blame or assault, but by the basic capability of an honest inquiry asked from a place of genuine strength. As the assembly dispersed into the night, that inquiry lingered in thousands of minds. Are you devoted to Jesus or to your own interests? And for many, including Miriam, it was the start of a very different type of restoration. Morning emerged over the vacant hall, faint illumination filtering through elevated windows onto abandoned agendas and plea cards. Maintenance teams moved systematically through the paths, erasing all physical proof of the previous evening's extravaganza. But some things couldn't be removed. Found another stack of wonder cloths under row G, shouted a cleaner, holding up a pile of pale fabrics marked with Benny's image. Individuals just abandoned them. His overseer inclined grimly. Waste containers already full of those. Found a whole container of unclaimed restoration liquid bottles, too. $39 each according to the cost label. The two men exchanged aware looks. They'd worked occasions here for years. Performances, athletics, meetings. But the aftermath of inner revivals always felt different. More revealing of the gap between assurance and truth. Something altered about last evening, though, the cleaner noted, removing torn plea request cards. Never seen so much abandoned. Usually individuals take everything like mementos. His overseer surveyed the discarded products. When the enchantment dies, nobody wants the items. Outside in the vast vehicle area where thousands of vehicles had competed for position 12 hours prior, a single family vehicle remained. Miriam sat behind the controls, Emma sleeping across the rear place wrapped in covers. They hadn't gone to their lodging. Couldn't afford it now that the wonder hadn't appeared. Instead, they'd spent the night here. Miriam, too fatigued and disillusioned to begin the 14-hour drive home. She stared at the hall's imposing outline against the brightening sky. Everything she'd trusted about heavenly restoration, about Benny Hinn's special energy, about her urgent journey. Here all of it had collapsed alongside the figure in the white attire. Her device buzzed with another news alert. She'd been receiving them steadily since 3 a.m. as the account spread. Minister collapses after challenge with Chuck Norris. Benny Hinn hospitalized following heavenly arrival. Viral recording. Chuck Norris reveals TV preacher with one inquiry. Each title framed the evening differently. Each comment area revealed the fractures among those who had witnessed it. Some defending Benny with fervent loyalty, others describing their own paths of disillusionment, many simply expressing shock at the raw breakdown of such a meticulously maintained exterior. Miriam scrolled through her online feed, finding dozens of recordings from different positions. One had already reached 9 million views. The instant when Benny pointed accusingly at Norris and screamed, "Who do you think you are?" followed by Norris's simple reply and Benny's physical breakdown. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. A tap on her window startled her. She turned to find Pastor Elias standing beside the vehicle, leaning on his support staff, a paper tray with 2 beverage cups in his free palm. Miriam paused, then lowered the window. "Thought you might require this," he stated, offering one of the cups. "Noticed your vehicle when I returned from my scripture. Left it under my place last evening." Miriam accepted the beverage with murmured appreciation. The warmth seeping through the material cup was the first comforting thing she'd felt since Emma had touched Chuck Norris's palm. "Mind if I join you for an instant?" Pastor Elias inquired, inclining toward the passenger place. Miriam glanced at Emma, still sleeping, then inclined. Something about the old pastor's seasoned features inspired trust, the opposite of what she'd felt observing Benny's breakdown. Pastor Elias settled into the passenger place with a grateful breath. "These old joints aren't what they used to be," he stated, placing his staff between his feet. "Neither is this old core in some ways. but maybe that's for the better. They sat in quiet for an instant, sipping beverage as the sun continued its ascent. I failed her, Miriam finally murmured, gaze fixed on the hall. I brought her all this way for nothing. Pastor Elias followed her view. What did you aspire would occur in there? A wonder. The type he always displays on his transmissions. Emma has her tone caught. The experts say 6 months, maybe less. I thought if anyone could restore her, he could. She looked down at her device where a news piece displayed an image of Benny being carried out, surrounded by protection guards holding up outerwear to block photographers. Now I just feel foolish. Not foolish, Pastor Elias corrected gently. Urgent. Urgent for aspiration. There's no shame in that. 3 payment cards exhausted, Miriam continued lodging. We can't afford contribution. I can't return. She laughed bitterly. I contributed $2,000 I didn't have right before Chuck Norris approached. Pastor Elias winced. The pre-event contribution always the largest because aspiration is highest before truth sets in. You've witnessed this prior. Different scales, same design. He looked toward the hall. Been examining revival movements for 50 years. Some sincere, many created. The actual ones never begin with beams and products. From the rear place came Emma's tone, small but clear. The serene figure wasn't false. Miriam turned, surprised to find her child awake, blue gaze solemn against her pale features. Emma, sweetie. The loud figure needed everyone to gaze at him. Emma continued, struggling to sit up, but the serene figure just was. I felt it when he touched my crown. Pastor Elias grinned gently. Out of the mouths of young ones, he said softly. She's accurate. You know what you witnessed last evening wasn't the failure of trust. It was the difference between extravaganza and essence. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small worn material book. I've been a pastor for 50 years, he stated, running his digit over the book's cracked back. Seen services rise and decline, seen restoration that defied health explanation, and seen deceivers manufacture false wonders. The difference isn't in the loudness or the illumination or the group size. What is it then? Miriam inquired, urgent for something solid to hold on to. Genuineness, reality, service without self-advancement. He motioned toward the hall. In there, it was all about him, his capability, his energy, his presentation. Actual trust is the opposite. It's about emptying yourself, not filling the platform with yourself. Emma coughed weakly from the rear place. Like the serene figure, she stated. Pastor Elias inclined. Exactly like him. He wasn't there to be viewed. He was there to view, to witness, to pose one sincere inquiry. Miriam wiped away moisture. But Emma still requires restoration. What do we do now? The old pastor looked thoughtful. There's a small gathering place about 2 miles from here, he stated. Nothing elaborate. No mist devices or giant displays. Just individuals who plead like they mean it and care like it matters. He handed her the worn book from his pocket. It wasn't a scripture as she'd anticipated, but a simple contact book. Page 37, he stated. I've written down the location and the pastor's name. Tell her Aaliyah sent you. Her? Miriam inquired, surprised. Pastor Sarah, 25 years serving the area. No television feature, no private transport. Just consistent existence with those who suffer. He grinned mildly. The type of trust that doesn't require a beam to be viewed. Why would they aid us? Miriam inquired. They don't know us. Because that's what actual trust does, he replied simply. It serves without asking for anything in return. No recorders, no multitudes, no gathering plates, just individuals trying their best to care like Jesus did. Emma leaned forward between the places. Can we go there, Mother? Miriam looked at her child's features, so young yet somehow wise beyond her age. Then at Pastor Elias with his gentle certainty. Then back at the hall. Imposing but somehow empty in the morning illumination. Yes, she decided. We can go there. Pastor Elias inclined approvingly. And afterward, there's an expert friend of mine at the University Health Center pioneering some new therapies. I can't assure wonders, but I can assure he'll view you today. No cost. Fresh moisture filled Miriam's gaze, not of urgency this time, but of thankfulness. Why are you aiding us? The old pastor opened his door, preparing to depart. Because someone once aided me when I required it. No extravaganza, no conditions. Just one palm reaching out to another. He grinned at Emma. That's how actual restoration works. Individual to individual, core to core. He stepped out of the vehicle, leaning on his staff. One more thing, he stated, bending mildly to meet Miriam's gaze. Whatever occurs with Emma's therapy, and I'll be pleading it's good news, remember what you learned last evening. Reality doesn't require beams. Affection doesn't require enhancement. Trust that's actual works just as powerfully in murmurs as in shouts. With that, he closed the door and began making his way across the vehicle area, the rising sun casting his long outline before him. In the vehicle, Miriam turned to look fully at Emma. For the initial time since the experts had delivered their devastating news, she felt something other than urgency. Not the chaotic aspiration that had driven her to Benny's revival, but something quieter and stronger. "Ready to depart, sweetie?" she inquired. Emma inclined, her gaze brighter than they'd been in weeks. The serene figure was accurate, wasn't he? Actual restoration doesn't come from platforms or beams. "No," Miriam agreed, turning the key in the start. "I think it comes from reality, from affection without act." As they pulled away from the hall, neither noticed the rental vehicle parked at the far end of the area or the figure inside it observing their departure. Chuck Norris lowered his window mildly, letting in the morning atmosphere as he noted the exchange between the pastor, the guardian, and the youngster. He didn't grin, didn't incline, made no motion of contentment. He simply witnessed the instant with the same complete focus he'd brought to the previous evening's events. Then he started his own vehicle and drove in the opposite direction. His purpose completed across town. Last evening's events were being processed very differently. In the leadership area of the Millennium Lodging, Benny Hinn's group had gathered in crisis meeting. Devices open, devices constantly humming. They worked chaotically to contain the harm. "We've issued the official declaration." The relations guide reported dark circles under her gaze, revealing she hadn't rested. Sibling Benny experienced a powerful arrival of the holy essence that temporarily overwhelmed his physical form. He's resting comfortably and grateful for the outpouring of plea support. The economic guide looked up from his display. Harm management on the contributor's side. The premium backers are requiring personal communications already prepared. The relations guide replied, "We're emphasizing inner conflict and opposition, framing Norris as an unwitting tool of resistance to the energy." A younger staff individual shifted uncomfortably. "But that's not what occurred. We all observed it." He just posed a simple inquiry. Quiet fell over the area. The unspoken truth hung in the atmosphere. They had all witnessed the dismantling of something they'd helped establish, something many had begun to doubt long before last evening's breakdown. The content guide cleared his throat. "We've submitted rights claims against most of the viral recordings, removed about 60% so far. It won't matter," said the economic guide, closing his device. "Everyone observed what occurred. You can't unobserve it." Miles away in a private health room with discreet protection posted outside, Benny Hinn lay awake, staring at the upper surface. The experts had diagnosed fatigue, fluid loss, and extreme strain physical manifestations of an inner and mental breakdown. His device on the bedside surface continuously illuminated with messages from staff, family, backers. He'd stopped checking hours ago. For the initial time in years, he had no plan to follow, no act to maintain, just the cold truth of a figure facing the ruins of his meticulously constructed identity. His group had already crafted the narrative for online platforms. Overcome by the capability of the divine, their leader had been overthrown in the essence. On the platform, a heavenly arrival so powerful it had overwhelmed even him. They'd posted carefully selected segments that framed the incident as deeply inner, rather than deeply human. But alone in his room, stripped of platform appearance and designer attire, Benny couldn't maintain the deception any longer. Not with himself. Not after last evening. One inquiry had brought down years of careful construction. Are you devoted to Jesus or to your own interests? He'd established a network on the answer being unquestionably the former. Established private transports and residences on that answer. Established a global following on that answer. But in the cold illumination of morning, with no recorders running, no assembly chanting, no tunes rising on signal, the reality stared back at him from the health upper surface. He couldn't remember the last time the answer had truly been Jesus. A single drop tracked down his cheek. Not for the public embarrassment or the inevitable harm management his group now scrambled to perform, but for something more profound. The recognition of the existence built on unstable ground instead of solid base, on act instead of reality. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His helper entered, device in palm. "The leadership is requesting a crisis gathering," she stated quietly. The major contributors are threatening to withhold next period's commitments. The Nashville event is requiring confirmation. You'll be there next week? Benny closed his gaze. The machine he'd created needed constant feeding. Constant act, constant reassurance, constant extravaganza. Tell them. I require time, he murmured. How much time? He had no reply. In the small gathering place 2 miles from the venue, morning illumination filtered through basic colored glass, casting gentle hues across wooden benches. No mist devices, no expert illumination, no large displays or recorder groups. The group, perhaps 50 individuals, welcomed Miriam and Emma without spectacle. They listened to their account. They gathered around them in a circle, not for display but for aid. They pleaded not with staged declarations or rehearsed flows, but with stumbling, sincere terms. And afterward, as assured, Pastor Elias's expert friend viewed them at the University Health Center. He explained a new test therapy, made no guarantees but offered sincere aspiration, arranged for health transport back to Missouri and enrollment in the program. By evening, everything had altered for Miriam and Emma. Not through extravaganza, but through genuine care. Not through a TV preacher's contact, but through ordinary individuals serving without recorders or claps. As their transport lifted off, carrying them home with new possibilities, the news cycle had already begun shifting focus from last evening's emphatic breakdown. Titles about Benny Hinn's inner encounter competed with viral recordings of the challenge with Norris. Commentators debated, backers defended, detractors attacked. But beneath the noise and extravaganza, something quieter and more important had occurred. A lesson learned by thousands who had witnessed the evening's events in person. Actual capability needs no enhancement. Actual trust needs no beams. Actual restoration begins when the act ends. And in residences across the nation, individuals who had observed the recordings, who had viewed the stark contrast between loud act and serene genuineness, began asking themselves the inquiry that had nothing to do with Benny Hinn or Chuck Norris specifically. In my own existence, who am I really devoted to? Some found the answer uncomfortable. Others found it liberating. But for many, it marked the start of a journey towards something more genuine than they had known prior. Because sometimes the most powerful inner moments happen not in extravaganza and display, but in the quiet aftermath of breakdown, when reality stands revealed in the simple illumination of a new day. And as darkness fell once more over the empty venue, the echo of one simple inquiry remained, challenging anyone with hearing to perceive. Are you devoted to Jesus or to your own interests? For those willing to listen, it was the start of a different type of revival altogether. Up next, we have 2 more incredible accounts that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to observe and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this recording, make sure to follow. It would signify a lot.